Salutations, respected viewers. This is George from Ireland. In this video, I'm going to adumbrate why Tucker Carlson's racist. Look at the evidence, particularly of his anti-Hispanic prejudice. There was a fascinating broadcast that Mr. Carlson made back in March of this year, and he was railing against immigration, both legal and illegal. Now, illegal immigration goes on in many countries. It's often a sign of prosperity, and breaking the law is generally a bad thing. Laws should be enforced. Obviously, there should be a bit of compassion, a few exemptions, I think, if people have stayed in countries for a very long time. I think illegal immigration is probably not the gravest problem that America's facing. Anyway, I'm not American. You may say, none of my business. Please comment on the affairs of my country. I'd like to hear your opinions. But Mr. Carlson, he mentioned Hazleton, Pennsylvania, which in 2002 had only 2% of its population who were Hispanic. And by this year, it's the majority Hispanic. And he mentioned that is a dreadful thing, and saying, imagine that was your town. Notice the unspoken assumption that his viewers are white. And it is true that Fox News' viewers are overwhelmingly white. Nothing wrong with that. But it's just notable that he assumed that you are white watching it. Now, it's true that most Americans are white, but the Fox viewership, the whiteness of their viewers is unusually high. Rather than say being 65%, as in that's the population is about 65% white, in Fox's case, it's much higher than that, which is neither a good nor a bad thing. Carlson said, no society has ever changed so fast. Well, I'm not sure that's true. Many societies have had very rapid immigration. You could say the United Kingdom even now, for example. Or let's say societies on the east coast of America in the 17th century. Native Americans who experienced a white immigration, indeed white invasion. Various African and Asian countries, Latin American countries, which were invaded and colonized by European countries, which wasn't always a terrible thing. Sometimes it was. How would you feel if this had happened in your neighborhood? Carlson asked rhetorically. Presumably the answer we're supposed to give is dreadful, which is patently how Mr. Carlson feels. So why didn't he ask, if you're Hispanic, you're African American, how would you feel if loads of whites moved in? Wouldn't that be woeful? So what's the problem here that people are moving in? Hispanic people, he didn't say whether they're American or not. Most Hispanic people in the United States are American citizens. Many of them have had ancestors in the United States for generations. So they might have moved in from another state or indeed from another part of Pennsylvania. But because they're not white, that is terrible, according to Mr. Carlson. Does not matter how nice they are, he said. Most immigrants are nice. Okay, well, I think it does, actually. I care if people are nice. And I care that Mr. Carlson's not. I don't care about their race. He patently does. So you could be a good person, but if you're Hispanic, that's a problem. So that's it. He's made it crystal clear. The race is a problem for him. He is racially prejudiced. It's not whether an individual is a decent person, whether they're honest, whether they contribute to their community, whether they're kind, generous, anything like that, morally upstanding. No. That counts for nothing. If you are Hispanic, Carlson doesn't want you there. And he says it doesn't happen where our leaders live. Well, I think it does. Who's the president? It's Trump. Isn't that right? Carlson's always trumpeting for Trump. Trump comes from New York City, one of the most ethnically diverse cities in the United States. Or how about, Washington, D.C., where the president is now, quite racially mixed, about half African American, lots of other ethnic minority people. Okay, who are the leaders, the people he rails against, the cultural opinion formers? Hollywood, well, Los Angeles, that's very racially mixed. Probably under 50% white. He doesn't think that's so terrible. San Francisco, quite a culturally influential city. Could that be said to be a leading city? Quite racially mixed. Atlanta's a very major city in terms of finance even. And that's not majority white city, and on and on. So yeah, it does happen where the leaders live. Maybe not where Mr. Carlson lives. But why is it bad that Hispanic people should move in? That's the automatic assumption. I don't think it's bad or indeed good. It's neutral. Why does someone's race matter in that sense? You must have a reaction to it one way or the other, according to Mr. Carlson, positive or negative. And with him, it's totally negative. No, he does judge on the content, on someone's skin and not on the content of that individual's character. Well, how would Mr. Carlson, if someone said, you're a lovely person, but because you're white, you're bad news, you're not wanted around here, it's dreadful. And he's rightly pointed out that some black people in South Africa are prejudiced against the white majority. which Carlson thinks is outrageous, and indeed it is outrageous. But when the prejudice is the other direction, people with less pigmentation against those with more pigmentation, he agrees. Another thing is, what is Hispanic? Is it a linguistic group, or is it an ethnicity? Well, obviously it relates to Spain and the Spanish language. So some Hispanic people have got some Spanish ancestry, others have got none. The Spanish is their first language. Some Hispanic people in the United States for centuries. Spanish people set up towns on the east coast of North America in the 18th century. So there have been some Hispanic people in the United States ever since. Then obviously people moved in from Latin America, the various countries that colonized by Spain. Some of those got entirely Mesoamerican or black ancestry, whatever, might not have any Spanish stock whatsoever, but they still counted as Hispanic. They're a white Hispanic. They're Hispanic people who are whiter than me. Spanish is their mother tongue. Obviously, people might come from a Hispanic background but actually stop speaking Spanish. Let's say Ted Cruz. Well, he speaks it a tiny bit. So are they Hispanic or not? There's no clear definition. And how white is white? So these racial groups blur into each other. But he is someone who's obviously fixated with this sort of thing, with drawing boundaries, not just geographical boundaries, but ethnic boundaries, linguistic boundaries, who's very intolerant of people who don't fall into his category, who don't have a fairly low amount of melanin. That's what matters to him. So Mr. Carlson's ancestors moved from Switzerland to the United States in the 19th century. Some people would have thought that was woeful. And if Mr. Carlson thinks that immigration is so terrible, he could deport himself back to Switzerland. Anyway, I think it would be a real quandary for Mr. Carlson. What if he had to choose as a neighbour between a Hispanic American, citizen of the United States, that is, and me? I'm not American, but I don't have very much melanin, and English is my mother tongue. That would be a real dilemma for him. But obviously most Hispanic citizens of the US speak perfect English. There are a few of them speak it not quite perfect, and obviously there are people who've immigrated to the United States, not citizens at the moment, legally, or a few people are illegal as well, and they speak English in many cases, but sometimes not fluently. You've got to start somewhere, you've got to arrive somewhere, and people have always been saying this wave of immigration is dreadful, will be the ruination of our country. And, immigration is not entirely positive. So I know some people are a bit too extreme in saying, we must have unlimited immigration. I want to be a little bit selective about it. But the United States is one of the most difficult countries in the world to get into. It's a country I used to consider moving to, but no longer. I know British people who've had terrible difficulty moving there. And obviously I don't dispute the United States is entitled to form its own immigration policy. But you used to see it as that immigration could be a boon, and not anymore. Well, the US could be losing out. But like I say, my point about British people is the United Kingdom is one of America's closest allies, been on America's side in many wars for almost a century. Well, you could even say a century, the First World War, even the Opium War in the 1840s. But British people who are married to Americans often find it very difficult to get in. It takes over 2 years of constant paper chase and blood tests, and it can't be done at any hospital. It has to be done at this particular hospital, and it's a bureaucratic nightmare. It's Kafkaesque. And so it's not really it's not home of the brave, it's home of the paranoid and the cowardly. That's the way Carlson wants it, to have this paranoid fear of foreigners. It's appeal to nativist sentiment. It's obviously distracting from real problems, misdirecting the working class, and wanting to get to monster the most exploited people in the United States, and not say, hey, corporations, you need to pay us decently. Or let's have publicly funded healthcare, so that would actually solve our problems. Anyway, and it's a bit like part of his nativism is sheer ignorance. It even extends to matters culinary, saying that my tacos are American things when they're originally from Mexico. Another point is obviously quite a few states in the USA used to be Mexican territory. New Mexico, there's a clue in the word Mexico, and California with all those Spanish language names, Nevada as in snowy, and there are a few more. Florida wasn't part of Mexico, but it was a Spanish colony, as in flowery, that's what its name means, and on and on. Utah, Arizona, I could say that. Don't dispute they're rightfully part of the United States now, but the US has absorbed cultural memes from other countries just as it's transmitted them, just as my country gains from Hollywood and other aspects of American culture. So we can't strictly demarcate cultures. They give and receive. It's a game of give and take. We trade in every sense, not just the commercial one, and we learn from each other, the living experience. Well, the big shocker for Mr. Carlson is we're all human. We're all related somewhere along the line. We all started in the Rift Valley in Africa. So there doesn't have to be a fundamental difference between one nationality and another. And citizenship, passport, it's a piece of paper. I mean, I know it confers certain rights, but these things can be gained. Citizenship can be lost, indeed, can be renounced. So I don't think we should hold up as something sacred, something absolute, something inflexible. It's not. It's temporary. It's man-made. Just like boundaries have changed and will change again. They are forever in flux. So he seems to want university. So he seems to want uniformity, railing against diversity. He questions this liberal left shibboleth that diversity is a strength. And I think it's a worthwhile question to ask. And I suppose it might not always be a strength. There could be excessive diversity and tolerance. But diversity of ideas, I think he would want that one. He often says that he's a stalwart defender of free speech. And I think it's good to be a doughty advocate for free speech, saying that other people completely disagree with me, but obviously I speak up for them. They're entitled to voice their opinions. But the United States is diverse, is ethnically diverse. It's only going to get more so as the white birth rate is relatively low, and immigration is mostly of non-white countries. Immigration is necessarily of non-Americans. So that can't be changed. So Carlson must be exceedingly dispirited, because it's going to get worse and worse in his view. There's no going back to the 1950s, a time which he seems to think was the halcyon days. Obviously, not quite so sweet if you were an ethnic minority person or a gay person and so on. So he wants everyone to be the same, enforce homogeneity, not so much choice, well, unless it's guns or something. And you mustn't eat anything that's at all foreign or learn a foreign language. The way ignorance is exalted, or insularity is also a good thing. American culture, where does that come from? Obviously, some of it's developed in the United States and some of it is borrowed from other cultures. Nothing wrong with that. My culture's learned from other countries too. I'm open-minded. I would like my nationality to be more open-minded. So, Tucker Carlson, he poses as being anti-elite. Who are the elite? Would it be rich, straight white men like Tucker Carlson? Born Americans, who inherited a fortune, trust fund baby, and he lambasts the ruling class. But there's no elucidatory comment about who the ruling class is. I thought it would be the very wealthy like him, the billionaires and the corporations who have tax codes written to their liking. So it's yet another straw man argument from this fearmongerer.